My brother laughed when he said it. An actual laugh, short and breezy, like I'd asked him something slightly ridiculous. Babysitting isn't really my thing, Di. You and Marcus make decent money. Just hire someone. 18 months of covering his rent. 18 months of an emergency credit card I'd handed him like a lifeline. 18 months of watching his aspirations shift from filmmaker to podcaster to content creator, while his bank account stayed at zero and mine quietly bled. So I thanked him, said I'd figure it out, and hung up. Then I sat very still at my desk for about 45 seconds. My husband looked up from across the room, read my face the way he always does, and said nothing. He just waited. "I'm going to need Tom's number," I said. "Tom is my attorney." That was the moment the story truly begins, and I promise you won't want to stop reading. The email had arrived at 6:40 in the morning, before Sophie had woken up, before my first cup of coffee, before I'd had any kind of buffer between myself and the world. The subject line read, "Final presentation slot confirmed senior manager review, Thursday at 2 p.m. I'd been working toward that presentation for 3 years. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, of missed birthday dinners, of telling Sophie that mommy had to finish one more thing. The kind of 3 years that either ends in something significant or quietly destroys you. My daughter, Sophie, had been running a fever since Monday. She was 3 years old, small and soft and stubborn, and she'd been clinging to me since the fever broke the night before, curled against my shoulder like punctuation. My husband Marcus had already used every hour of leave he had. He'd covered the first 2 days, and we both knew the math Thursday was mine to solve. I wasn't asking for a miracle. I was asking for 4 hours. My brother Tyler had been living in an apartment across town for the past 18 months. It was a 2-bedroom in a decent building, and he'd moved in with exactly 2 suitcases, a camera bag, and the breezy confidence of someone who'd never once had to think too hard about logistics. He'd needed a co-signer on the lease because his credit was a patchwork of optimism and missed payments. I co-signed. His rent was $1,200 a month. I'd been quietly covering $600 of it since month 3, when he told me the client project had fallen through and he just needed a bridge. That was 15 months ago. I'd also added him to my auto insurance policy because his had lapsed. I'd given him a credit card linked to my account for emergencies, the kind of emergencies that apparently included Instacart, streaming subscriptions, and what I would later discover was a standing Saturday brunch at a place downtown that charged $30 for eggs. I'm a CPA. I've spent 10 years at a mid-size accounting firm building a reputation for finding things that don't add up. My colleagues call me precise. My clients call me invaluable. My brother called me his safety net without ever once using those words. I want to be honest about something, because the comment that gets left on stories like this, the one that stings because it's partially right, is, "Why did you let it go on so long?" The answer isn't simple. Tyler is 5 years younger than me, and from the time we were teenagers, our parents treated that age gap like a canyon. I was the reliable one. I was the one who got herself a scholarship and a career, and didn't require maintenance. Tyler was the one who needed protecting from himself, and somehow, that instinct transferred to me when I grew up and became the person with resources. I didn't fund his life because I thought it would buy his love. I funded it because I genuinely believed I was buying him time. Time to find his footing. Time to figure it out. What I didn't realize was that I was buying him out of every consequence he should have been learning from. When I called him on Wednesday afternoon, Sophie was asleep in the next room. I was at my desk with 3 proposal binders open and a presentation deck that still needed 2 hours of work. I told him about the Thursday slot, about how important it was, about Marcus's leave being exhausted. I kept my voice even and practical. I told him it would be 4 hours, max. Sophie was already feeling better. She'd probably just watch cartoons and nap. He listened. I could hear the television in the background, some show I didn't recognize, the audio tinny and distant. "I get it," he said, "and I wish I could. But I'm in the middle of this project right now, Di. I can't really have a toddler running around when I'm trying to record. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, actually, because I'd never once asked him to reorganize his life around mine. Not once in 18 months of subsidizing his existence had I called in anything close to a favor. "It's 4 hours, Tyler," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He exhaled the way people do when they're about to say something that reveals exactly how little they've been paying attention. "Look, you're good at your job. You make good money. Just hire a sitter. I'm sure you can afford it." Then he laughed. That short, breezy sound, like this was all very simple and I was the one complicating it. The anger that moved through me in that moment was cold and specific, not the hot, blurry kind. It was the kind I recognized from difficult negotiations. It was clarity, wearing the clothes of emotion. "You're right," I said. "I'll figure it out." I hung up. Marcus came and stood in the doorway. I told him what happened, word for word. His jaw tightened. He's a quiet person by nature, methodical, but I've learned that when he goes still, it means something. "The lease," he said. One word. "The lease," I agreed. I hired a professional caregiver for Thursday through an executive childcare service. The rate was steep, the kind of steep that under any other circumstances would have made me wince. I paid it without hesitating. Then I opened my laptop and logged into the account management portal for the apartment complex where Tyler lived. I wasn't named on the lease as a tenant. I was listed as the co-signer, the guarantor, which meant I had access to correspondence and financial records connected to the unit. It also meant that if Tyler violated the lease terms, I was liable. I'd never actually read the full lease carefully after signing it 18 months ago. That was a failure of judgment I was about to correct. I read it in its entirety that night, after Sophie went to sleep. Clause 11 was the one that stopped me. It read, in plain language, that the unit was approved for occupancy by the listed tenant only. Any additional occupant residing in the unit for more than 14 consecutive days without written approval from the property manager constituted a material lease violation. Any subletting of any portion of the unit, partial or otherwise, was strictly prohibited and grounds for immediate eviction and financial liability to the cosigner. I read it twice. Then I opened my emergency card's transaction history, the card I had given Tyler for genuine emergencies only. I hadn't looked at it carefully in months. I had set it up with a reasonable limit and an alert for large purchases, but I'd been letting the smaller charges go unexamined the way you let a slow leak go unexamined when you don't want to deal with what you'll find. The statement told a story. There were the brunches I already knew about. There were the streaming services, the food delivery charges, the random Amazon purchases, but there was something else, something that repeated every month like clockwork. A Venmo transfer. $800, every first of the month, to a username I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen for a long moment. $800, every single month, for 11 months. I did the math without meaning to, because I always do the math. That was $8,800, moved, every month, from a credit card I paid to a person I didn't know. My first thought was practical. If Tyler was subletting the second bedroom in that apartment, he was not only violating the lease, he was charging someone rent on a unit I was co-guaranteeing and pocketing the difference. The rent I was covering for him was $600 a month. He was collecting $800 from someone else. He was profiting from my goodwill by $200 a month. That was the moment the cold calm I usually saved for hostile audits settled completely over me. I felt it like a key turning in a lock. I called Tom. "I need you to pull up the cosigner agreement for a lease I signed 18 months ago," I said. "And I need to know what my options are if I've discovered a subletting violation." Tom, bless him, didn't ask why at 11:30 at night. He just said, "Send me the document." Thursday morning arrived the way important mornings always do, with an unkind amount of clarity. Sophie was bright-eyed and fever-free, sitting up in bed and explaining very seriously to her stuffed elephant that today was a special day. The caregiver, a calm and experienced woman who arrived at 12:30 with a warm smile and a tote bag full of activities, had Sophie charmed inside of 4 minutes. I kissed my daughter on the forehead and walked to my car, feeling something I hadn't felt in months, unencumbered. The presentation was 2 hours of meticulous financial analysis, difficult questions from senior partners, and the kind of focused pressure I have always done my best work inside of. When one of the partners asked how I handled situations where a client's numbers didn't align with their stated position, I said, I follow the data precisely where it leads, regardless of what anyone hoped it would say. Then I make sure everyone in the room understands what it means. She nodded slowly. I knew before I walked out that I'd gotten the promotion. On the way home, I called Tom. 2 things, I said, merging onto the highway. First, I want to formally notify the property manager of the subletting violation and begin the process of removing myself as co-signer on the basis of that breach. Second, I want to cancel my portion of the monthly rental payment effective at the end of this billing cycle. Tom walked me through it methodically. Because the violation was material and documented, I had clear grounds to request co-signer removal. The landlord would be notified, which would trigger their own lease review process. Tyler would likely be given a cure period and opportunity to resolve the violation, but it would not be quiet, and it would not be comfortable. One more thing, I added. I need to freeze the emergency card immediately and have it removed from my account. And I need to notify my insurance carrier that I'm removing a secondary driver from my policy. Tom paused. That's a significant set of changes, Diana. I know, I said. That's the intention. I want to pause here because I know what some people will think. They will think this was an overreaction. They will think that one thoughtless comment from a younger brother doesn't warrant financial demolition. I want to address that directly because the comment wasn't the reason. The comment was the moment I finally allowed myself to see what I had been declining to look at for 18 months. The reason was the $8,800. The reason was 11 months of collecting rent money on an apartment I was guaranteeing, pocketing the profit, and never once mentioning it. The reason was that while I was working 60-hour weeks and carefully calculating whether I could afford to hire a caregiver for a 4-hour window, my brother was running a quiet little side income off my name and my credit. He hadn't just forgotten to be grateful. He had been actively taking advantage of the infrastructure I'd built around him and calling it survival. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the car, and sat in the quiet for a moment. They always forget who holds the leverage. The first sign that things were unraveling on Tyler's end came Friday morning. A text at 8:14 a.m. Di, something's wrong with the insurance. My car's showing as uninsured on the app. Can you check? I put the phone face down and made coffee. At 9:40, another text. Also, I tried the card, and it was declined. Is there a bank issue? Kind of need it today. I picked up the phone and typed back. No bank issue. I've made some changes to my accounts. I'll explain when I'm ready. The reply came in under a minute. What does that mean? What changes? I set the phone down again. At 11, he called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was confused and slightly annoyed the tone of someone who had bumped into an obstacle they couldn't quite identify yet. He said the card must be a mistake, said he really needed the insurance sorted, said to call him back. At 12:30, a second call. I let that one go too. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost didn't open it. When I did, it said, "Hi, this is Becca. I think you know Tyler? He's really upset. I'm not sure what's going on, but he told me about the lease thing, and I just wanted you to know we didn't mean any harm. We're not trying to cause problems. Becca." The Venmo recipient, Tyler's apparently not-so-secret girlfriend, who had been living in the second bedroom of his apartment, the apartment I co-signed, for the better part of a year. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, "I appreciate you reaching out, Becca. I don't have any issue with you personally, but the lease Tyler signed has very specific terms, and those terms have been violated. That's a matter between Tyler and the property management, not between you and me." She didn't respond. At 3:40, Tyler showed up at my front door. I saw him through the window before I opened it. He looked rattled in a way I hadn't seen before, not the casual, slightly disheveled version of himself I was used to, but genuinely off balance. He had his hands shoved in his jacket pockets, and he was doing the thing with his jaw that he'd done since we were kids when something wasn't going his way. I opened the door. "Hey," he said. The easy, breezy quality in his voice was gone. "Can we talk?" "Sure," I said. "Come in." Marcus was in the kitchen. He glanced up, gave Tyler a brief nod, and stayed exactly where he was. We'd discussed this. I didn't want to do it alone, and I didn't want Tyler to feel cornered. There's a difference between those two things, and I knew which conversation I wanted to be having. I brought Tyler to the living room. I had 3 things on the coffee table: my laptop, open to the credit card statement, a printed copy of the lease agreement, marked at Clause 11, and a brief summary document Tom had helped me prepare, outlining the cosigner removal process and timeline. Tyler looked at the papers and then looked at me. "What is all this?" "Sit down," I said. He sat. "I want to start with this," I said, turning the laptop toward him. The Venmo charges were highlighted, 11 of them in a column, $800 each. "I've been looking at the card I gave you. The one I said was for emergencies." Tyler opened his mouth, closed it. $800 every month for 11 months, I said. To Becca, who, I've come to understand, has been living in the 2nd bedroom of your apartment for approximately that same period of time. It's not. I'm not finished, I said. My voice was quiet, not sharp, not raised, just steady. The lease I co-signed, which you can see here, I tapped the printed page, prohibits subletting in any form. Becca living there is a lease violation regardless of what arrangement you two have. But beyond that, the money she was paying you was going through a card I fund. You were collecting rent from her and covering it with my credit, which means, functionally, I have been subsidizing your girlfriend's rent without knowing it. Tyler's face had gone through several expressions in the span of 30 seconds. Defensive, then calculating, then something that looked almost like shame before he covered it up again. It wasn't like that, he said. Becca helps with rent. She chips in. I was using the card for what? I asked. I wasn't angry. That's the part that I think surprised him most. I was completely, surgically calm. For what, Tyler? I need you to explain to me how $800 a month from your girlfriend, run through an emergency card I pay, to an apartment I co-sign for, is anything other than what it looks like. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him without expression. I was going to tell you, Tyler said, which is the sentence people say when they have decided they never actually will. I know, I said. You were always going to get around to it. I pulled the co-signer document toward him. I've already notified the property management about the lease violation. They'll be reaching out to you directly. I've also begun the process of removing myself as co-signer on the basis of the material breach. That process typically takes 30 days. During that time, you'll need to either cure the violation, meaning Becca would need to leave, or be added to the lease with proper approval, or make other arrangements. Tyler stared at the document. Other arrangements, he repeated slowly. I've also canceled the emergency card and removed you from my insurance policy. I should have done both of those things months ago, but I think we can both agree I've been slow to draw lines. I watched him process it, watched the sequence of his reactions. The disbelief first, then the search for an angle, then something that settled like the beginning of actual reckoning. Die, he said, and his voice had changed. Younger. I don't have savings. If they evict me, then you'll need to find a new place, I said. With Becca, if you'd like, without me as a safety net. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I can't believe you're doing this over me not watching Sophie for one afternoon. And there it was, the reframe. The attempt to make this small, to compress 3 years of financial drain and 18 months of active exploitation into one babysitting request. I leaned forward slightly. This isn't about Sophie, I said. You not wanting to watch her for 4 hours was just the moment I stopped avoiding what I already knew. This is about 11 months of you collecting rent on an apartment I'm liable for and never saying a word. This is about a credit card that was supposed to be for emergencies being used as a monthly transfer to your girlfriend. This is about 3 years of calling yourself broke while you were building a comfortable little system on my credit and my goodwill. I paused. You didn't forget to say thank you, Tyler. You forgot who was paying for any of it to exist. He didn't have an answer for that. I watched him try to find one and come up empty. What am I supposed to do? He finally said. It wasn't angry. It was close to genuine. Get a job, I said. A real one. Not a project, not a pitch, not something that will pay eventually. A job. Figure out your own lease. Pay your own insurance. I should have let you do all of that 2 years ago. I didn't. And that's on me as much as it's on you. He sat with that for a long moment. Then Marcus, who had been completely silent, said from the doorway, "You're smart, Tyler. You've always been smart. You just haven't had to use it." Tyler looked at him. Something passed across his face that wasn't quite gratitude, but was in the neighborhood of it. He left about 20 minutes later. No dramatic exit, no slammed door. He just picked up his jacket and walked out, and the house was very quiet after that. The next few days were tense, in the way that restructuring always is. The property manager contacted Tyler within 48 hours. I received a courtesy copy of the notice, which outlined the violation and gave him a 30-day cure period. Tyler, from what I gathered, told Becca she needed to either get added to the lease officially or find her own place. The landlord ran Becca's credit, came back with concerns, and the whole thing became exactly as complicated as these situations always are when you've been operating on the margins of your own agreements. My parents called on Sunday. My mother first, her voice carrying the particular frequency she uses when she believes she's being reasonable but is actually deeply agitated. She said she'd heard from Tyler. She said, this seemed like a lot over nothing. She said family doesn't cut each other off over a misunderstanding. I let her finish. "Mom," I said, "Tyler was collecting rent from a subletter on an apartment I co-signed without telling me. He was running the payments through a card I fund. I found this out because I looked at my own account statements. This isn't about a misunderstanding." Silence. "Well," she said finally, in the way people say that word when they're buying time. "I love Tyler," I said, and I meant it. But I love him too much to keep being the reason he doesn't have to figure out his life. My father called an hour later. He was quieter about it, more measured. He said he just wanted to make sure I was okay, which I appreciated. He said he didn't know about the subletting, that Tyler hadn't told him the details, only that there was a situation with the lease. I believed him. My father has always been better at listening than my mother gives him credit for. "Is there any way to work this out quietly?" he asked. "It's already being worked out," I said. "Just not quietly," he sighed. "You were always the one who saw the whole board," he said. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close to an acknowledgement. The promotion came through officially the following Wednesday. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop and sat in my backyard with Sophie while she ran through the sprinkler in October's last warm afternoon. Marcus came outside with 2 glasses of sparkling cider, because we'd both stopped drinking on weeknights since Sophie was born, and we clinked glasses over her head while she shrieked at the cold water. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked. "Lighter," I said, and I did. Genuinely, unexpectedly lighter, in the way that you feel when you've been carrying something for so long that you stopped noticing the weight until you put it down. Tyler moved out of the apartment at the end of the month. He found a smaller studio unit a few miles from his old place on his own, without my name on anything. Becca moved in with him, I heard, which I had no feelings about either way. He got a job at a production company doing entry-level editing work. My mother told me this like it was news I might find surprising. It wasn't surprising. It was exactly what I'd always believed he could do. 3 months passed. My new role demanded more of me and gave back more in return, which is the bargain you hope for and don't always get. Sophie turned 4 and became obsessed with planets. Marcus built her a little solar system mobile that hung above her bed, and she could name all of them in order, which she demonstrated to literally everyone who came into the house. I didn't hear from Tyler directly for those 3 months. I'd thought about reaching out a few times and stopped myself. I didn't want to insert myself back into his life before he'd had a chance to see what it felt like to stand in it without me underneath. Then, on a Friday evening in January, my phone lit up with his name. I sat with it for a moment before I answered. "Hey," he said. His voice was different, not the breezy, surface-level ease of before, something more settled underneath it. "Hey," I said. There was a pause. Then, I wanted to say I was wrong. Not about one thing, about a lot of things, for a long time. I was wrong, and I knew I was wrong, and I kept going, because it was easy. Another pause. That's all. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say it. I stayed quiet for a moment. "Thank you," I said. "That means something. How's Sophie?" "She can name the planets in order." He actually laughed at that, a real one, not the breezy kind. "She's 3. 4 now." God, he said. Send me a picture sometime. Okay, I said. We didn't talk for long, maybe 8 minutes. No grand reconciliation, no promises about the future, no agreement about what we were going forward. Just two people who had spent years on opposite ends of a transaction, finally standing on something closer to level ground. I hung up and went to find Sophie, who was in the living room explaining Saturn's rings to the dog. Here is what I know about the years I spent holding everyone else up. I did it because I believed it was love. I did it because I was the capable one, and capability can feel like obligation when no one teaches you otherwise. I did it because saying no to the people you love is one of the hardest skills anyone learns, and most of us learn it the wrong way through exhaustion, or resentment, or one Wednesday afternoon, when a breezy laugh over 4 hours of babysitting finally makes something click into place. The money was never the point. Not really. The point was that I had spent years treating my own limits as something to be managed around, something to apologize for, something that other people's needs could simply override. I had made myself so available that people stopped asking and started assuming. And the moment I stopped, the moment I held the line with both hands and didn't move, everything rearranged itself into a shape that was finally honest. Tyler is paying his own rent now. Becca is on the lease with him. He calls on Sophie's birthday, which is more than he used to do. My parents still don't entirely understand what happened. I've accepted that. Marcus and I took Sophie to see snow for the first time last February, a long weekend in the mountains, just the three of us. She stood at the edge of a field of white, with her mouth open for a full 10 seconds. Then she turned around and said, very seriously, Mom, this is the best thing. I thought about that a lot on the drive home. The best thing. Not the biggest thing. Not the most expensive or the most impressive. Just a field of snow and nowhere to be, and nobody needing anything from anyone. Yeah, I thought, that about covers it.